So I think, inshallah, we'll get started. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وبارك وسلم عليه. نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيد المرسلين يا خاتم النبيين يا شفيع المذنبين يا أنيس الغريبين يا رحمة للعالمين صلى الله عليه وسلم. Last time, which was 2 weeks ago, we were talking about Ayat al-Tathir, and we kind of went into that a little bit, and that was continuation from the week before. And we talked about Khaybar and Khandaq, and the role of Sayyidina Ali Karamallahu Wajh in all of that. I want to kind of reiterate certain points and kind of go into a little bit more detail on certain other points today before we start continuing on, inshallah. One is as far as Ayat al-Tathir, the ayat, the verse of purity or purification. This is verse, or the last part of verse 33. So surah number 33, verse number 33. In which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. And that it is only Allah's will, His intention, to purify you, O people of the household, with this perfect purification. And so part of this is, so if somebody has an issue with, well, I don't accept this, well, it's not your intention anyway. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it's only His intention. So if you don't accept it, well, that's your problem. It makes no difference on the reality of the situation. And as we said, the hadiths on this are very clear. That this is specific to these five. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he included himself in Ahlul Bayt by saying, Nahnu Ahlul Bayt, we the Ahlul Bayt. And he included himself by covering himself in the cloak. So, the hadith in Sahih Muslim, in which Bibi Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha, the beloved wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the narrator. And she says that one day Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came out wearing this black striped cloak, and it was made of camel hair. And as he's walking, he calls Imam Hassan, who's a young boy, takes him under the cloak, and then Imam Hussein al-Islam, and then Bibi Fatima and Sayyidina Ali Karamallahu Wajh. So all of these alayhimus salam, he takes them under his cloak, and then he recites this verse, or this part of the verse, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ, specifying that these are the ones that it's talking about. Okay. The hadith and the narration that this is revealed, because this verse was revealed in the house of Bibi Salma radiallahu anha, another wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the mother of the believers. And when the verse is revealed, he called for these four. And so you have this Sahih hadith in Sahih Muslim. And then you have these other hadiths which are in various tafasir, including Tabari and all these other traditional tafasir. And no one disputes them. At least no one disputes the content. What they dispute is the meaning. And we'll get into that in a minute. And in that, when he calls for these four, he takes them under his cloak and he says, Allahumma ha'ulahi ahli. That, oh Allah, only these are my household, or my family. And when Bibi Salama, when she wanted to get under the cloak, he stops her. He says, this is not for you. You are good where you are. You've been given much good, but this is not for you. This separates them from everybody else.
Should I ask you the reason why?
Get into that. Yeah, inshallah. Okay. And, we've talked about, like, the say hadith in again say Muslim, where Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, when he's talking about the virtues of Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh, he mentions the mubayla, when the Christians from Najran came and debated with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and in the end, when they had no response to his reasoning or his arguments, but they still didn't want to accept. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals the verse of Mubahala, which is verse 60 something in Surah Al Imran, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he says, Abna'ana wa abna'akum wa nisa'ana wa nisa'akum wa anfusina wa anfusakum. That you call that we call our sons and you call your sons, and we call our daughters and you call your daughter, or your women, our women and your women, and we call ourselves and you call yourselves. And we do mubayla. Mubayla means that you get together and you make dua that whoever is the liar, Allah's curse be upon him. Of course, they backed out when they saw him coming, but how was he coming? He took the cloak, he took underneath his cloak, these four. And then he said, and again, and Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu is the narrator of this, and it's narrated in multiple places, where he says, Allahumma ha'ulahi ahli. Oh Allah, only these are my family. Okay. And so the argument against it, that the people try to use against this, one argument, and of course when people don't want to accept, they're always going to come up with issues. So one of the issues that they come up with is that, if you look at the beginning of the verse and the next verse, it talks about the wives. But again, that becomes irrelevant when you have a clear-cut statement and action of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Sorry to disturb you.
Yeah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not only the one who brought the Quran, but he in reality is the living, talking, breathing Quran. He is the explanation to the Quran. Okay. So when he explains a verse in a certain manner, then any other explanation becomes irrelevant, or any other understanding becomes irrelevant. There are no hadiths talking about this part of the verse as including the wives or anybody else. Okay. The only thing that they have, that those who claim no, this is for the wives, they have the statement of Ikramah. Okay. So you have to understand who Ikramah was. He is one of the narrators of a hadith. He is accepted as what they call a thiqa narrator, which means that his memory was good, and he wasn't known to lie in a general sense. Okay. And so this is at least the collectors of hadith categorize him in that way. He was the slave of Abdullah ibn Abbas. So you have like Nafi, who's the slave of Abdullah ibn Umar. He's also a narrator of hadith. Nafi always remained loyal to Abdullah ibn Umar. So that was one thing. Here, Ikramah, even though he narrates a lot from Abdullah ibn Abbas, but he became Khawarij or Kharji. Okay. So, on one spectrum you have the Rawafid, which are in the extreme group of the Shia that curse the companions. And according to them, only 6 or 7 companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam remained Muslim after him, and that was it. Everybody else apostated. Okay. On the other extreme, you have the Khawarij, who cursed the house, or the extreme version of them. They're different. You have different categories here, but the extreme version of them cursed the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and say that Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh was kafir. So he became what was known as Haruri Khawarij, which was the most extreme version of the Khawarij. Ikramah did. And he ended up going to North Africa, where he spread this nonsense that Ali was kafir. And he is the one that would go into the marketplace and yell out and scream that, "Oh people, this verse, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ, is not for the people that you think it is, but it's for the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." Okay, so people, what some people will do is, they will attribute his saying to Abdullah ibn Abbas, even though he himself never says that Abdullah ibn Abbas said this, or this was his opinion. This is his own statement that he's making, and he goes into the marketplace. He's not doing this in a educational setting. He's going into the marketplace yelling this out. And he also starts off with, "Oh people, it's not for the ones, this verse isn't for the ones that you think it is," which tells you in itself that the main thought of that time was that this part of the verse is specifically for the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and specifically for these 4, and then 5 including Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. So that's the only thing they have, and they use that, and they say, "Oh, see, you have." But then you have the clear statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which contradicts that, but they don't want to accept that. But from the other aspect, like Imam Jalaluddin Suyuti, rahmatullah, he even wrote a book listing the names of narrators in Bukhari that were either Rawafiz, which means those extreme Shia that curse the companions, or Khawarij, and Ikramah is amongst that category. So he listed them who's who. The thing is, if a Shia makes a statement that benefits or that is in favor of Abu Bakr and Umar, that's going to be acceptable to, within certain parameters. That's going to be acceptable. The same thing, but if he makes a statement that goes against them, that's not acceptable. The same thing if a Khawarij makes a statement that favors Ahlul Bayt, then that would be acceptable. But when he makes a statement that's against Ahlul Bayt, then again, that's not acceptable. This small core is separated because they are also from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said that he is from them. So that separates them from the rest of the ummah. And this gets to your question as to why them. They are created for him, from him. The companions, they were created for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they are not from him. These are created for him, from him. And this gets back to, you weren't here when we first started. We started off with the narration which Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal quotes in 2 places, which is Fazale Sahaba, virtues of the Sahaba. And he also quotes this narration again in Manaqib Amir al-Mu'mineen, which is specifically about Sayyidina Ali Karamallahu Wajhu himself. In which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that my nur and the nur of Ali were one until 14,000 years before the creation of Adam alayhi salam. So a lot of people will jump up, and when we talk about Sayyidina Ali Karamallahu Wajhu's nur, they say, well, Abu Bakr is nur and Umar is nur. Yes, we accept them as nur. We have no problems accepting them as nur. They are lights, for us to follow. But show me any place where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that their nur and his nur were one. And you can't. So again, that makes the distinction in itself right there. For Bibi Fatima salamullah alayha, he said, Fatima badatum minni. That Fatima is a part of me. I mean, every part of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is something that deserves our respect and honor. Al-Husaynu minni wa ana min al-Husayn. That Hussein is from me and I am from Al-Husayn. Al-Hasanu minni wa ana min al-Hasan. So again, this distinguishes them, and this we're going to get into as we talk more about Imam Hussein al-Islam specifically, because as we mentioned, a couple of last time also, is when you look at Imam Hassan and when you look at Imam Hussein al-Islam, these are basically two parts of the whole, and their lives, their mannerisms, their their understanding, the way they did things are very parallel to one another. Okay? The things that happen to them are also very paralleled. You get that distinction later on, or not distinction, but separation later on. But otherwise, when you look at them, no one could say that one was greater than the other. And so when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is a point that we're going to keep making over and over again. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a statement about them, or he did something with them or for them, this isn't simply a grandfather adoring his grandchildren. Because with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, everything that he says is nothing but revelation. وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. If you look at the logic of the statement itself, the way the sentence is put together.
This is Quranic.
Yeah, Quranic verse, Surah Najm, verses 3 and 4. Okay, when you look at grammar, or when you look at language in general, and this is how legal documents are written. You have something where you have the negation followed by an exception. And the kalma is the very simplest example of this. So you have like la, which is a negation to begin with. La ilaha, nothing worthy of worship. And then you have illallah, except Allah. So you start off with the negation, and then you have the exception. The exception is more important than the negation. The fact that there is no God doesn't prove that Allah exists. But the fact that Allah exists proves that nothing else is worthy of being worshipped. In this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts off with وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. He doesn't say anything from his own nafs, from his own self. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Verily, or without any doubt, everything he says is nothing except revelation. So everything he says is exactly as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants him to say it. Where he wants him to say it, when he wants him to say it. In reality, it's the way he loves for him to say it. Okay. So again, and also, we've talked about this before, so kind of just reiterating points here. وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. So, Battle of Badr.
Quranic verse.
Yeah, again, Quranic verse, Surah Anfal. Battle of Badr. As the fighting is going on, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam picks up a handful of sand. Most people say pebbles, but it's really sand, and he throws it. If you look at the way the battle was laid out, you have Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, behind the Muslim army. You have the Muslim army, and then you have Quraysh, right? When he throws this, every grain hit one of the disbelievers. From a physics standpoint, it should have hit the believers, right? Yeah. But it didn't touch any of the believers, and it hit every one of the disbelievers. And every one of them recognized that they were hit. So it's not like, it's just a fleeting thing. They knew they were hit with something. And this proves so many different things, but we won't get into that. Because the point here that I want to make is the statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes when he does this. وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. The same layout. The negation followed by the exception. Okay. You got ma, and then you got lakin. Okay? But. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you didn't throw, saying to Rasulullah, you didn't throw when you threw. Which, if I only look at that part of the statement, it's very, it's very strange. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Rasulullah, or saying to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you didn't throw when you threw.
So who did it?
Well, that's where the lakin comes.
That's the exception.
Walakin Allah rama. But it was Allah who threw. Okay. So what this gets into is that the action of the beloved, the lover takes the action of the beloved as his own. Okay? This is that connection of love. So the lover, to him, whatever his beloved does, this is his. But there are two aspects of this. One is that aspect, that, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whatever you do, this is what I do. Because he doesn't do anything but what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants him to do. Okay? The other aspect of this also comes that, of course, we see the verse here, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Right? Okay. We have not sent you, and this also same setup. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. The negation followed by the exception. We have not sent you except as a mercy to all of creation, to all of the worlds. Okay. So the kuffar could have said, oh, you're such a mercy, then how could you hurt us? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, don't worry. You didn't do it, I did it.
Let them say what they want.
Yeah, let them say what they want. You see?
And that's the wisdom behind. That's why God tell them, man, you throw it, but you did not throw it.
Yeah.
It was me who threw it.
Uh-huh.
It was
Right.
Allah who threw it.
Salam. Okay, so I kind of wanted to cover that aspect of what we talked about partially 2 weeks ago. Okay, and I think that should be relatively clear on that part of things. You had a question last time, which I said I would cover this time, which I will. And we'll get into that in a couple of minutes. We talked about Khaybar, and before that we talked about Khandaq. And as we said in Khandaq, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said when Ali radhiyallahu anhu struck Amr bin Abdul that one strike of his laid in the scales would be heavier than all of the deeds of all of the ummah laid on the other scale. And then in Khaybar, of course, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam certified, because he said, I will give the banner to the one tomorrow who will conquer Khaybar, and who loves Allah and His Messenger, and is loved by Allah and His Messenger. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Done deal.
Yeah, and both ways. Everybody can claim to love them, but here it's like, it's okay, yeah, he truly loves them, and they truly love him. No questions. Certification. Between Khaybar and then Fatih Makkah, there's not a whole lot that goes on other than on the international front. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is sending letters to Kisra, who's the Persian emperor, Qaisar, the Heraclius, the Roman emperor, or the Byzantine emperor, Abyssinia, to Najashi, to in Misr, the Coptics, Muqaykis, who's the leader of the Coptics in Egypt. Those who treated the letters with respect were given something, whether they accepted Islam. Well, those who accepted Islam, of course, were given everything. But those who did not accept Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not destroy their kingdoms. Whereas Qaisar, because the letter started off with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, letter from Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Qaisar, the king of Persia, he felt that his name should have come first, so he ripped the letter.
It was a Qaisar or Kisra?
Qisra, yes, Qisra. So Qisra ripped the letter, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will rip his kingdom like he has ripped my letter, and exactly that's what happened. But here, there are many other duties that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave to Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh to go and deal with these things and issues. But this is also the time when Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein al-Islam are growing up. Because Imam Hassan was born 3rd year of Hijri, month of Ramadan. Imam Hussein al-Islam was born 4th year of Hijri, month of Sha'ban. And so this is when you get all of these, where they talk, you get various companions talking about, they would go to see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of them he went to go see, and it was dark, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was wearing the cloak, and he said he kept seeing something moving in the cloak. He's wondering what's moving in the cloak. And then, as they're talking, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam opens part of the cloak, and he sees that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein al-Islam are, kind of crawling around inside all over. And this is where also, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is taking them on his shoulders. They're walking around with the shoulders, and we get the statement of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu when he sees this, and he says that, he says when he sees this, he says, and this is one time when Imam Hassan al-Islam and another time when Imam Hussein al-Islam was on the shoulders, he said, what a beautiful ride. So this is the statement of Umar, what a beautiful ride. But the response of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, he says, what beautiful rider, what a beautiful rider. Again, this isn't simply the statement of a grandfather adoring his grandchild. This is way beyond that. Okay? And for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to refer to, and even to name them, because Hassan means beautiful, Hussein means beautiful. And he named them himself. Not because, again, this isn't simply a grandfather naming his grandchildren. This is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling us their reality. And no one had been named that before them, because no one could live up to those names. We now can name our children that because of their sacrifices.
So I have a cousin, Hassan.
Yes. So now we name our children after them, right? Because of their sacrifices. This is also, when we get where one time Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's giving the khutbah, and Imam Hassan walks in.
He's young.
Yeah, he's like maybe 3 or 4. So he walks in the masjid because the door of their house was connected to the masjid. So he walks in. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is giving the Jummah khutbah. He leaves the khutbah. Khutbah is part of salat. And we'll get into another aspect of this. He leaves the khutbah and picks him up, brings him and sits him beside, next to him as he continues the khutbah on the minbar. And then he looks at him, and he looks at the people, and he looks at him, and he looks at the people, and he makes the statement. He says that this son of mine, and this is why, well, there are multiple reasons. Abna'ana wa abna'akum is also one of the main reasons why the companions used to refer to Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein al-Islam as Ibn Rasulullah, the sons of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that this son of mine is the master. He is the Sayyid of men. And because of him, there will be peace between 2 large groups of Muslims. Which is also proof that, because he's the one who made the peace with Muawiyah, this is also proof that we cannot call the other side non-Muslims, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that 2 groups of Muslims.
Like the Shia one.
Yeah, you know, like certain groups want to claim that, oh, they were not Muslim. No. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they said they were Muslim. Okay? This is also when one time Imam Hussein al-Islam walks into the masjid. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is giving the khutbah. And he stumbles. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam immediately leaves the khutbah and catches him. And then he makes a statement, you know, that today I have kept my son from falling, because tomorrow he will keep my religion from falling. You know, and there's so many, you know, and the hadith, and we're gonna, like I said, these are things that we're gonna reiterate over and over. In Sahih Muslim, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says about Imam Hassan al-Islam, he says, Allahumma inni uhibbuhu wa ahibbahu wa ahbib man yuhibbuhu. That, oh Allah, I love him, so thou love him, and love those who love him.
Imam Hassan.
Imam Hassan al-Islam. But you also have a similar statement about Imam Hussein al-Islam. And you have another statement that where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that, oh Allah, love those who love Hassan and Hussein and their parents. Again, these aren't just random statements.
They got the same age, or one of them older than the other one?
Imam Hassan al-Islam is 10.5 months older than Imam Hussein al-Islam. So, yes, 10.5 months. Because Imam Hassan al-Islam is born 15th of Ramadan, 3rd year of Hijri. Imam Hussein al-Islam is born the 3rd of Shaban, 4th year of Hijri.
So in one point in time, they can be same age?
Yes.
Like my
Yeah,
daughter,
technically,
I got
yes.
2 daughters saying, almost saying what you're
Yes.
saying.
Yeah, so you can say that one is 7, and for about a month and a half, the other is also
that's
7.
what both of my daughters.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, one of them 7. You know, between February to the March 15, they both can be same age.
Yes.
MashaAllah.
Yes. So same thing here. Yeah. And there are other things that we're going to talk about as we go on about them. You know, and this is a subject that we can never exhaust, and you know, a subject that we really, I mean, they're very important subjects, because they are, loving them is part of Iman.
He also said there's Sayyidul Shabab al-Jannah.
Yes. So he said about both of them that they are the leaders of the youth of Jannah. Right? So I should follow my leaders.
With love.
You know,
With love.
Yeah, with love. And in Jannah, everybody will be a youth. You know, doesn't matter how old you are when you die here. In Jannah, you will be a youth.
Inshallah.
You know, inshallah. And they are the leaders of the youth of Jannah. Right? And that includes so many other people, which I'm not going to get into right now. We'll mention that later on. You know, but they will be the leaders of them all.
You mean Hassan al-Hussein?
Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein al-Islam. You know, and in fact, they will enter Jannah. You know, of course, we know that the first to enter Jannah is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even though technically somebody can argue something there, because
Bilal.
technically the first to enter Jannah will be Sayyidina Bilal,
Yeah.
radiallahu anhu, because he will be holding the reins of the camel that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be riding in on.
Okay, what about those imam before them? I mean, they still be in the Jannah too, right? Like Adam.
Oh, the
Ibrahim.
Anbiya, the prophets.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. But no one will enter Jannah until Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has
Still
entered
be.
Jannah.
So they
Because there is no Jannah without Rasulullah. Okay? I mean, his presence is Jannah. And so, and this is why, and we've talked about this.
Can I ask you a question, Dr. Mark? What about those people before him? They don't know him.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, there are different aspects of there. So anybody who knew about their prophet at that time,
okay.
okay, they knew about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because every prophet told them about the coming of Rasulullah.
So every one of them knew about him.
Yes, they may not have known his name, okay, but they knew that he was coming,
Okay.
and about his characteristics.
Okay.
Okay. You do have some people who truly, okay, they didn't get the message. And for those folks on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they'll say we didn't get the message, Allah will not hold them accountable for not having received the message. But for some of them, not for all of them, but for some of them, they will say, oh, we didn't get the message. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask them that if you are given a command now, will you accept it? And they will say yes. So he said, well, then go and jump into the fire. And those that will obey the command before they land in the fire will be placed in Jannah. And those who refuse the command will be taken into the fire. But that's not us. That's not us. Yeah, I mean, and that's not, so, people start asking these hypothetical questions, forgetting that we need to focus on ourselves. That's not us. Okay? We got the message. So now we need to apply the message. You see?
I'm just trying to understand it. Right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, Allah is merciful.
Yeah, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not take into account anyone who, for something that is beyond his control. This is the mercy of Allah. Yeah. Okay? So there are people that will exist like that, who will be raised up like that, but they will not be treated unjustly.
Even nowadays, a lot of people they have an excuse where we never heard anything about Muslim or.
Well, see, that excuse.
Like if you go into the Christian country,
And see, but that excuse doesn't apply to the Christians, because if you read their books, if you read the Bible with an open mind, there's so many indications about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in there that are very clear. In fact, I know Christians who have become Muslim, and they became Muslim because of passages in the Bible that told them that someone's going to come after Isa al-Islam.
They didn't mention no name, but just said.
Well, the name is mentioned also, but the translation isn't given there.
I think they mentioned our prophet in Jewish book also.
Yeah, in the Songs of Solomon, he's mentioned by name.
Yeah, they name it what, Muhammadin?
Muhammadin,
Yes,
yes. So he's mentioned by name, but of course they translate it differently. But even with all that, there are other indications. So that gets into a different issue as well.
And also, the Rasulullah said that toward the end of time, that Islam will reach every household, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean, now with the internet, everybody knows something about Islam.
Everybody knows Islam exists, pretty much.
Yes, yeah.
Unless you're out, like, in the middle of the Amazon.
Yeah, you're a
or
headhunter
somewhere.
tribe or something.
Yeah, or somewhere. But everybody knows. So it's up to everyone, and that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created within us this innate nature to try to know Him. Because everybody worships something, whether it's money, or
Power.
status or power or whatever. And when people get in trouble, doesn't matter who they claim their God is. They always refer to one, somehow or another. Because that's the nature.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Like the Russian guy who was fell from the airplane. He never believed in God in his life, but then when the airplane messed up, then started thinking about God.
Yeah, suddenly. Yeah, even the atheist. Yeah. Oh God, save me.
Oh God, save me.
So, again, that's innate. So there's something there, and if I keep ignoring that something, that's on me. Yeah. Now coming to kind of before next week, inshallah, we'll kind of start expounding more on Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein al-Islam, and then also get into Fatih Makkah and the role of Sayyidina Ali Karamallah in that. Because that's another place where people try to say, oh, it wasn't that Ali, it was some other Ali. But your question last time, is this will take a little bit of time. I want to kind of go over that. You asked, we were talking about like Imam Zaid. And this is something that, kind of is jumping way ahead, but this gets into a question that I was asked very early on as well, so I figured I'll go ahead and kind of give some more of the details here. Of course, as we've talked about, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the Khilafah is for 30 years. Okay. After which will come a cruel monarchy, after which will come the age of tyrants, after which will come Imam Mahdi.
Imam Mahdi, that's the last one.
Yes. Okay. So, of course, after him issues will come. So Imam Mahdi will come, and then Isa alayhi salam will come, and they will be together for a while. But that's a separate issue right now. Okay. So the Khilafah ended with Imam Hassan alayhi salam, because Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajhu, when he was martyred, that marked 29.5 years. Then Imam Hassan alayhi salam took the Khilafah for 6 months. And then after the time period was over, he handed over the rule. A lot of people say, oh, he handed over the Khilafah. There was no Khilafah to hand over because the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam already said Khilafah is for 30 years. So there's no Khilafah to hand over. He handed over the rule. Okay?
To Muawiyah.
To Muawiyah radiallahu.
So you say 30 years for each Khilafah? Or
No.
just the whole?
Total.
The whole Khilafah.
The whole Khilafah.
That Khilafah, that initial Khilafah is for 30 years. When Imam Mahdi comes, he will revive the Khilafah.
Okay.
Okay. But that initial Khilafah, after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you add up Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman,
That's what I meant.
Ali, yes, and the 6 months of Imam Hassan al-Islam, you get exactly 30 years.
Okay.
Okay.
I thought it's Abu Bakr and Umar and Ali, each one, they get a 30 years, but
No.
the whole thing is 30.
The whole thing is 30 years. Because Abu Bakr radiallahu Abu Bakr radiallahu was 2.25 years. Umar radiallahu was roughly 10 years. Uthman radiallahu was around 12 years. And then you have Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajhu is not quite 6 years. And then Imam Hassan al-Islam is 6 months. Okay. So then you have, so after the Khilafah, you have the reign of Banu Umayyah, who reigned for roughly 90 years. Okay. So 90. And but you have, like he said, like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, he didn't simply say a kingdom or kingship, he said a cruel monarchy. So if you look at the overall trend of the kings are kings. They want to control, they want to save their power, right? So it's going to, even though you have within them some decent ones, but they are the exceptions to the rule. So you have within this period, you have Umar bin Abdul Aziz, rahmatullahi alayhi, who rules for roughly 2.25 years before he's martyred. And of course, by this time, the main way to martyr people was give them poison. Plausible deniability. I don't know what happened. He just died. So and his cousins are the ones who poisoned him because they wanted control back. But then, like I said, most of these, like when you look at the Safwani, not the Safwani, when you look at the Marwani Banu Umayyah, and Banu Umayyah is broken up into different, you have Safwan, which is Muawiyah radiallahu, and then Yazid, and then the second Muawiyah. And then you have the Marwani, which is Marwan bin Hakam, and then his son Abdul Malik, and then the sons of Abdul Malik after Abdul Malik. So you have the initial one, Walid, and all of these, when you look at the way they ruled, they were vicious, very, just very cruel people. And a lot of their cruelty was pointed toward Ahlul Bayt, the lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam through Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Because they also understood that these are the people that can potentially overthrow them. And it's kind of interesting, and this, like in even in Iraq or in Syria, Egypt, so-called Muslim countries, when the new king or the new dictator or the new ruler comes, what does he do? You eliminate who you think is a threat, right? You either jail him or you assassinate him or something. And this is what they did. So this isn't anything new. This is going on from the beginning. Even before Islam, this was there. And they took it to a different level. Okay. So, and this is where we get the atrocity of Karbala. And then after that, of course, the other atrocities against the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So during this time, you have like in Karbala, the only male survivor of Karbala is Imam Zain al-Abidin. Imam Ali bin Hussein is his name. Imam Zain al-Abidin is his title, which was given to him by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or rather, it was told to us by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And since I do have a little bit of time, I'll go into that too. This is where one time Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's sitting in the masjid with Jabir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu. And Imam Hussein al-Islam comes walking in. And again, he's, a toddler. And he comes and he lays his blessed head on the blessed thigh of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam looks at him, and then he says to Jabir, he says, "Oh Jabir," he says, "this son of mine will have a son. And on the day of judgment, an angel will come forth and announce that, O Sayyidul Abidin, O master of and leader of the worshippers, come forth and take your group with you." And he will come forth and he will take a large group with him to Jannah. And he says, and that son will have a son whose name will be after my own, meaning that his son's name will be Muhammad. And you will meet him, he says to Jabir, and you will meet him, and when you meet him, give him my salam. So the meeting is mentioned in Sahih Muslim. Because what happens is Jabir had lost, he was very old. He lost his physical sight. He used to give lessons in the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So one day he's giving this lesson and he hears these footsteps coming. And he stops. And he says to the people, he says, "I hear the footsteps of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam coming." And so he comes, Imam Muhammad Baqir, who's the son of Imam Zain al-Abidin. He comes, he sits down, and Jabir radiallahu anhu, he's asking me, he says, "What is your name?" And he says, "Muhammad." And this is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When somebody would ask him his name, he didn't give them long, drawn-out titles. Like these days, you ask them their name, and they give you, "I'm Dr. So-and-so," or "I'm engineer this and that, and I'm this and that," and all these other titles. I didn't Sheikh and whatever else, so-and-so. I didn't ask you what your titles are, I just asked you your name.
Yes.
Right? So he says Muhammad. So he says, "Muhammad what?" Muhammad who? He says, "Muhammad bin Ali," which was the name of Imam Zain al-Abidin. So he understood, he knew, and he knew from the footsteps who it was, but he just wanted to confirm.
But he couldn't see. Right?
And he couldn't see, so he's asking. So then he asks him, he says, "Come close to me." And he comes close, and he smells him. And he says, "I smell the fragrance of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam coming from you." And then he says that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told me to give you his salam. So, but Imam Muhammad Baqir had a much younger brother whose name was Zaid. So Zaid bin Ali. Imam Muhammad Baqir had a son, Imam Jafar Sadiq. So Zaid bin Ali is 6 years older than his nephew, Jafar Sadiq. So they're practically like brothers. Imam Zaid, his mother is actually from Sindh. this is when the Muslims were moving into that area.
Sindh is in like a
Yeah, it's part of Pakistan.
Yeah.
It's, I guess, Western Pakistan. So his mother is originally from there. So in the year 122 Hijri, Hisham bin Abdul Malik is the king. And the atrocities have kind of gone beyond all bounds. So he raises an army. Imam Zayd raises an army in Kufa to go and fight against the king. And today what they would call, the Muslim leader. And this is what these so-called leaders today want you thinking, we are the ones Allah has placed in authority over you, so you have to obey us.
He's trying to make the Muslim look bad.
Well, yeah. So Imam Zayd gathers this army of 8,000 men. Imam Zayd is the one, as I mentioned last time, he is the one that Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi gave bay'ah to, gave allegiance to. He gave his hand in the hand of Imam Zayd. And not only that, he gave him 30,000 dirham to equip his army. He wanted to join the army, but Imam Zayd said, no, you need to go back and continue this process of learning and teaching. So when he goes back, he tells his students, he says, look, he's forbidden me from coming, but you, whoever can go, go and join him. And one of his students that went and joined him, his mother came running, when he joined the army, his mother came to Imam Abu Hanifa and said, look, I only have one son, and because of your encouragement, he's gone and joined the army, and I only have one son, and if something happens to him, we will have no progeny. And so Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, his response to her was that, don't you wish or don't you desire that your son's name should be written amongst the names of the martyrs of Badr? And so she backed off then, and her son remained in that army. 30,000 dirham, because at that time you could buy a cow with 3 dirham. That's the silver coins. So, if I translate that to money these days, which I do a lot, that's roughly $10 million, right? Today's money. Because Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi was a silk merchant. Even with all of the dealings that he had, all this teaching and stuff, which was basically, his life, that business kept going. And he used that wealth on his students. He's the only one who also financed his own students. They didn't finance him. He paid for whatever they needed. He didn't take a dime for his services. And he also is one of those, because Imam Malik also gave a similar fatwa, that when you see scholars at the doorsteps of leaders, then don't take knowledge from them. Because these are guys that are getting paid by the leadership to say what the leadership wants to be said. They don't have their own voice anymore.
They've been bought.
Yes, they've been bought, and if they try to say something decent, and the leadership doesn't like it, then what happens? They get threatened with being cut off.
Yeah, kick them out, I guess.
Yeah, kick them out. You don't get any more money. You're done.
You're fired, basically.
Yes.
Or kill him.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Imam Abu Hanifa's fiqh student, or fiqh teacher of fiqh was Hamad bin Sulaiman, whose lineage goes back to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, but his spiritual guide and teacher was Imam Zayd. So now when Imam Zayd sets out with his army, of 8,000 men. Once they leave Kufa, and they're approaching the opposing army. The opposing army of Hisham was 20,000 men. 8,000 still had a decent chance against the 20,000. 8,000 against 20,000 is not unreasonable, you know, if you're talking about skilled warriors. So when they leave Kufa, certain leaders from within his army, you know, generals and whatever, they come to him and they say to him, they say, look, you know, we are willing to give our lives and our wealth for you, under the condition that you curse Abu Bakr and Umar, radiallahu anhu. And so Imam Zayd's response to them was, he says, how can I curse the ones about whom I have not heard anything but good from my forefathers? Of course, who are his forefathers? Imam Zayn al-Abidin, Imam Hussein al-Islam, Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he says, how can I say anything against them when I have not heard anything but good from my forefathers about them? And they say, well, we're leaving. We leave you. And this is why, this is the first time that the word Rawafiz was used, Rahzi. So he says, you are Rawafiz, you have abandoned the way. So that's why, like within the Shia, you have the Rawafiz who curse Abu Bakr and Umar. But you also have certain Shia that are known as Zaydi Shias. They don't curse anybody. And they say, well, you know, whatever happened, happened. Ali should have been the first Khalifa, but whatever happened, happened. We don't have any, you know, and they leave it at that. We can deal with them. You know, the others we can't deal with. But the reason they call themselves Zaydi Shia is because they attribute themselves to him, Imam Zayd, even though he wasn't Shia. Okay? So he was not Shia. None of these Imams were Shia. And so when they abandon him, you know, he's left with 313 men, which is interesting.
From 8,000?
From 8,000 to 313. All the rest abandoned him.
Gone.
Yes, it's interesting. Think about this. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this, you know, tells us in Surah Baqarah about Talut al-Islam fighting against Jalut. You know, this is where Dawood al-Islam kills Jalut in that army. If we read the story, you know, they come to a place of water and he tells them no one should drink from the water. Whoever drinks from the water cannot continue with me in this expedition. And his whole army drank from the water except for 313. All right. We look at Badr, the Battle of Badr, which is the analogy that Imam Abu Hanifa had made. Battle of Badr, how many Muslims? 313. Against Quraysh, 1,000 of Quraysh, right? Here, the same thing. You go from 8,000 to 313 men. Okay. So when this happens, you know, and you have the opposing army that's pretty much close now, the remaining people, they come to him, to Imam Zayd, and they say, look, we know we're dead. You know, what are we going to do against 20,000? So we will buy you some time, and you get out of here, escape. And that way you can continue the fight later on. And so he says, his response to them, he says, look, your advice is very sincere, and your advice is very good, but I can't accept it. I said, look, if you know that our advice is sincere, and you accept that our advice is good, then why can't you accept it? He says, because there is in my family the example of going into the battle. But there is no place in my family where you have the example of running away from the battle.
It's strong.
Yes.
It's deep, means something.
Yeah. And even if you look at that statement where he says, how can I say anything against the ones about whom I have not heard anything but good from my forefathers? He could have said, how can I say anything against the ones other than whom I know nothing but good about? He could have said that, but he didn't. He mentions the forefathers. Because if he had said that, they would have said, oh, you've abandoned the way of your forefathers. This is what they would have said. He said, look, this is the way, I am on the way of my forefathers. And this is their way. So he said, how can I leave the battlefield when there is no example in my family of leaving the battlefield?
Certain death.
Okay? Yes. And so the battle starts, and in the beginning of the battle, he's martyred. His son Yahya buries him as the fight is still continuing. But he buries him at the edge of the river where the water is coming over. And he does that because he's afraid. He knows that if they find his grave, they will dig him up and mutilate him. So he does this to try to keep them from finding his grave. This is why Ali, when Sayyidina Ali Karamallahu Wajhu was martyred, how many people went to bury him? Again, this is the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Khalifa of the Muslims. You know, you had a decent number of people in his Salatul Janazah. Of course, like we talked about, you know, Friday, for Uthman radiallahu anhu, you only had 17 people in his Salatul Janazah. For Ali radiallahu anhu, you had a decent number of people in Salatul Janazah, but how many people went to bury him? 3. You know, all his sons, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein and then one of the sons from the other wife. So they bury him. Ajahn. Why did they do that? Because they knew that if they buried him where everybody would know, then the Khawarij would dig him up and mutilate him. So they buried him in secret so that no one would know. And no one knew where he was buried until years later when Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam said that this is his grave. And this is why we know that this in Najaf. And even that's disputed, but the vast majority of people accept that because of Imam Jafar Sadiq's statement that this is the grave of Sayyidina Ali Karamallahu Wajh in Najaf. Okay? So this was like, you know, what? Roughly about 80 years after his burial. For 80 years, no one knew where he was buried. No one who knew could say where he was buried.
Then they bring him back to Karbala, right?
No, Imam Ali, Sayyidina Ali Karamallahu is in Najaf. He's buried in Najaf. Okay. So, and we'll talk about Imam Hussein al-Islam later, but I want to kind of tidy up or finish up with Imam Zaid a little bit. So he's buried like that, but after the battle they found his grave. So the opposing army found the grave, they dug him up, they beheaded him and sent his head to Sham, to the king, you know, as a gift. And they would do that to make sure that the king, this was proof to the king that yes, he's been martyred or he's been killed according to them. But then what they did was they took the body and they crucified it. So they strung it up, they hung it up, and the body remained like that for 4 years. So they take his body, they they hang him up, and what was interesting was that the body would slowly face the Qibla on its own. And then they would go and they would move it, and then slowly over time it would go back to facing the Qibla again. And this went on for 4 years, until after 4 years, his body's still up there. So the new king, who I don't know who it was, he had him taken down and burned. The body was burned.
So never been buried. And
the ashes were spread out. Yeah. And about Imam Zaid, Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi used to say that I never met anyone more knowledgeable than Imam Zaid. And Imam Jafar Sadiq was once asked about him. He was asked about him several times, but there was a statement. What happens is, and this is in the books of Rijal. So the books of Rijal are the books where you basically have the biographies of the people that narrated hadith. So Imam Zayd is one of the narrators of hadith as well, right? Again, you know, his level of knowledge is something that we can't even comprehend. So when Imam Jafar Sadiq al-Islam was asked about him because, because he raised this army against the so-called Muslim leader, of course, how can you go against the Muslim leadership? You have to be bad. And they bring out all of these hadiths, but the thing is, they don't look at the hadiths. The hadiths are talking about those who have been put in authority through the Islamic methodology, who are adhering to the rights of Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not those who are violating the rights of Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they came to Imam Jafar Sadiq and said, what about Imam Zayd? He did this and he raised the army and all of these other things. And his response to that question was, or to that argument, was also the same. He said that I don't know of anyone from among Ahlul Bayt more knowledgeable than Imam Zayd, or anyone who was more on the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam than Imam Zayd. Okay. And so again, he is the murshid, the sheikh of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi. So you have him here. Then of course, so this was 122 Hijri. Banu Umayyah is eventually overthrown 132 Hijri. But
that's like after 90 years of their rule, right? They were ruling for 90 years or something?
Yeah, they ruled for 90 years. They ruled for 90 years. So 132 Hijri, Banu Umayyah is overthrown. And this is when Banu Abbas takes over. But what's interesting about the way Banu Abbas took over, a lot of people think that, Banu Abbas, they're related to Rasulullah, so they must have been more kind and generous to the family or the household of Rasulullah, but the exact opposite is true. Because again, they saw them as threats. And the reason they saw them as a threat was because before Banu Umayyah was overthrown, Imam Hassan al-Islam's son is Imam Hassan Muthanna. So this is Imam Hassan Muthanna is the son of Imam Hassan al-Islam. His son is Imam Abdullah Maz. Okay, and his son is Imam Muhammad Nafs Zakiyah. Interesting thing for people who know about Pakistan, Abdullah Shah Ghazi in Karachi, rahmatullah alayhi, he is the son of Imam Muhammad Nafs Zakiyah. So he's like what's that? Fourth or fifth lineage from Imam Hassan al-Islam. A lot of people don't know that about Abdullah Shah Ghazi. They just think he's just somebody,
He's buried on the coast.
On the coast right there in Karachi. So what happens is that, before Banu Umayyah is overthrown, Banu Abbas, the leaders of Banu Abbas, Amin, Mansur, all of these big guys, the original leaders of Banu Abbas, they gave allegiance to Imam Muhammad Nafs Zakiyah at Abwa. Abwa is where Rasulullah's mother is buried. And so they gave him allegiance, and they said that after we overthrow Banu Umayyah, we will give you, the rule or the control will be handed over to you. Of course, after Banu Umayyah is overthrown, they put themselves in the seat. Now we've got control. And so they look at, the lineage of Imam Hassan and the lineage of Imam Hussein al-Islam as threats. So this is why, there's so many things, and we'll go over this later because I'm going to kind of end things in a little while. There's so many things where just you look, or so many mandates that were put out by Banu Abbas. Like one of the mandates was that you could not write Sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam. And this is why when you look at the books of Hadith, it says Qala Rasulullah Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. They don't mention the al. Okay. Even though you have the Hadith in, say, Bukhari, where Rasulullah Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says that the rood is not complete unless you mention the al, unless you mention the household. Okay. So he snuck it in that way, but he couldn't write that because if he wrote that, either he'd be killed or they would destroy his writings, which is what happened to many scholars. Because they didn't want anything that was going to remind the people about that household, because they needed to maintain power.
The legitimate rulers.
Yes. The same thing today. You know, you look at so-called Muslim countries, and you know, it's more prevalent like in Saudi, because they have a state religion. You know, and even like Banu Abbas later on, the state religion would be Mu'tazila later on, you know, which is not very far different from, you know, modern day Wahhabism. You know, so you have all of this, and you have, you know, again, you have scholars that are bought by the leaders, and you see this everywhere. Like even like my father's sheikh, when Bhutto was in power, the original Bhutto in Pakistan. So he wrote, you know, my father's sheikh asking him to come to visit him. And my father's sheikh wrote him back. He says, look, you know, the faqir does not go into the court of the kings. You know, he says, I'm in the masjid. If you want to meet me, you can come here. Yeah. Because again, you go to meet them.
Trying to buy you.
Yes.
You owe me something now.
Yeah. Or they create that illusion of, oh, you know, that you, yeah, that I'm sanctioned by him.
Yeah, I'm approved.
I'm approved.
So they're trying to
Yes.
get you in their game. You know,
Yep.
How they wanted.
Exactly.
It's, you know, politics is all about optics. What do you look like to the people? You
I
know?
want to answer this question. Doesn't politics equal law?
Modern day politics, yes. Yeah.
Because at one point, you know, politics is supposed to be you helping people.
No. Khilafah, and that's why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam distinguished the Khilafah from everything else. The Khilafah, the Khalifa is the servant to the people. That's his role, is that he serves the people. And if you look at the Khilafah, the actual Khilafah, when you look at Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali and Imam Hassan al-Islam, what did they do? They served the people. And when we look at like Imam Hassan al-Islam, he handed over the rule. The rule for what? People think, you know, he had control over a third of the known world. He handed it all over because he didn't want any bloodshed, the blood of the Muslims spilled. That's all he did. I mean, that's the only reason he did this.
Otherwise, he could have crushed them.
Yeah, he could have crushed them. But, you know, and today, you know, the rulers, they don't mind, you know, spilling the blood of hundreds of millions of people just for 1 square inch of land.
Yes, that's true. They're trying to stay in town as long as they can.
Yeah.
So
So Khilafah is service. Okay.
It's hard.
Modern day leaders, you know, are not Khalifas. Doesn't matter what title they put under their name. The same thing like Banu Umayyah, Banu Abbas, all of them refer to themselves as the Khalifa. But they weren't, because the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam referred to them as kings. And that's what they were. And now we are in the age of tyrants.
So what's okay now and then? What's the best way to serve like a Khilafah?
There is no Khilafah right now.
Okay.
The Khilafah won't.
I
The
understand
Khilafah. The
the
Khilafah will not be back until Imam Mahdi al-Islam comes.
Okay, what is the other way to serve people?
The main thing now, and this is, you know, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us about these times to come, right?
Okay.
You know, he told us about the various wars that are going to take place. And he also told us, when he told us about those wars, if you're there, don't take part in them. Okay? And he also told us that at this time, the main thing to do is to protect your own iman, the iman of your families, and those around you. That's all you can do.
That's hard enough.
That's hard.
That's a big enough struggle.
Especially around nowadays.
Even protecting your own iman these days.
Yeah, it's very hard.
I mean, this is a major struggle. So this is the situation we find ourselves in. This is the time.
And that scary hadith
Yeah.
also somebody said a man will wake up as a believer and go to sleep as a disbeliever.
Yes.
He'll go to sleep as a disbeliever. I mean, as a believer and wake up as a disbeliever. That's pretty scary toward the end of time.
Yeah,
you know?
nowadays it's very scary.
And we're seeing that. So many
Yeah,
people are
we're
becoming
seeing
atheists, and Hafiz are
I mean,
becoming
it's
atheists.
easy to get into Gunnah, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
It's-
Yeah, because there's so much deception. Everybody's throwing stuff out, and I'll end with this today. You know, someone sent me a video about this idiot, and he's talking about Islam, which is funny to me, because you have these ex-Christians. They don't criticize the Bible; they want to criticize the Quran. You have these so-called ex this or ex that, who become atheists, and they're not criticizing their original religion. They want to criticize Islam.
Because that's the
Why you? Which to me is proof of al-kufru millah wahida, that disbelief is one. When it comes to the truth, disbelief is all one. They all get together. Yeah, so they all are bashing Islam. And then you have so-called ex-Muslims, some of which truly are ex-Muslims, but most of which are not. They were something else. When we start looking up their history, you realize, they weren't ever Muslim to begin with. Who are criticizing what? Islam. So one of these guys, and this is a lie cannot stand on its own. So you have to understand that. A lie always has to, place itself on the back of the truth, because otherwise it can't stand. Because if a lie is truly a lie, is completely a lie 100% through and through, anybody can see that. Everybody will notice, this is a lie. But in order to make it believable, you have to connect it to the truth. All right? And this is part of the deception today, is that there's so much truth and there's that little lie, but that little lie will destroys everything else before it. Okay? So this guy, one of the things that he brings up is that about the destruction of the Kaaba. Okay, so we know that during the time, or 55 days before the birth of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abraha came to destroy the Kaaba, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prevented it, and we see this in Surah Fil, right? And many people, they quote the statement of the grandfather of Rasulullah, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib, where he says, where he holds on to the ghilaf, or the cloak of the Kaaba, and he says to Allah, he says, "Oh Allah, every owner protects its property, and this is your house, so you protect it." And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Ababil, and they destroyed the army, right? So, but then we see, like later on, and one of the examples will be Yazid, year 64 Hijri. Yazid, catapults fire into Mecca and destroys the Kaaba. And then eventually it's rebuilt. And then later on another army came, years later, and they destroyed part of the Kaaba. And then eventually it's rebuilt. And one of them even stole Hajar Aswad. So his argument is that, why couldn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect the Kaaba, later on? Is it not his house? Like when Hazrat Abdul Muttalib made the statement. Well, his argument would have some credence, or credence, rather, some legitimacy, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had protected the Kaaba as the Lord of the Kaaba. If you read the first verse of Surah Fil, it says, "Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil." It says, "Did you not see," talking to Rasulullah, "Oh my beloved, did you not see what your Lord did to the people of the elephant?" Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say, "Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbika bi ashabil fil." That did you not see what the Lord of the Kaaba did to the people of the elephant? So the protection of the Kaaba wasn't for the sake of the Kaaba. The protection of the Kaaba was because of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because his birth took place 55 days later. If the Kaaba had been destroyed, if Abraha's army had been successful and they destroyed the Kaaba, the people of Quraysh would have been taken as prisoners or killed, which would have included the mother of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So because of his presence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects the Kaaba. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that exactly in Surah Fil. Again, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka, your Lord, sallallahu alaihi wasallam's Lord. Okay? So there are many other things that he said, but this is one point that I just wanted to point out, is that they take this, again, he's basing this off of a lot of truth, but then he puts that lie in there to make people start doubting. Because yes, the Kaaba was, damaged and destroyed later on.
And the Hajar, so there was taken.
Yes. So all of this did happen.
But well, there was also he say that the
And he also told us that these things would happen.
no, as far as like the a mu'min is more valuable than the Kaaba.
Yeah, than the life of the blood of the mu'min is more valuable than
the
the Kaaba.
Kaaba, right?
Yeah.
So the Kaaba will it'll also be destroyed in the end anyway.
And then, but this is also the sad thing within the Muslims themselves. We have no problem spilling the blood of Muslims,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
But then if somebody does something else, then everybody's up in arms. But no one's up in arms when millions of Muslims are being killed
Right.
by so-called Muslims.
That's
by
sad.
so-called Muslim
I ask
governments.
that question a lot of times.
Yeah.
Why Muslims kill Muslims?
Read Surah.
It's the politics, I guess.
Well, it is the politics,
Money,
but
politics,
read
position.
Surah Ahzab, Surah number 33.
I mean, that's sad, really.
Yes, it is. It is. And this is it tells us the condition of the ummah today. So I'll end here today, inshallah.
This is hurt more than anything else when you see Muslim kill Muslim.
Yeah. So any questions that come to mind, write them down.
I will.
Okay.
Because I'm gonna have any questions.
Yeah, and so inshallah we will continue.
See, I like to know more. That's why. I
Yeah,
ask a lot
which
of
is good.
questions.
No, that's good.
If you don't ask, you won't know.
I mean, that's why, even though if I talk to anybody, really ask a lot of questions. Even on my job, on my work, outside the
have
work,
to ask.
everyone.
That's how you learn.
Because I want to get the bottom of it, I want to see what exactly the person talking about, So I want to see the whole thing.
Yeah,
So inshallah we'll make salat, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from the fitna and our families and the whole ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and may He allow us to fulfill the rights of His love and the love of His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
yeah.